And we're back. Welcome back, George. We are here for the fifth installment of our talks with you. We did four relatively short videos of intros. They were kind of like setup to the intro and intro to the intro. Um, Thank you to all the returning subscribers. You keep this channel going. To all the new people, like, share, and subscribe. Forgot to say that every time. And yeah, I think I'm going to hand it off straight away to George and let him summarize maybe a little bit what you guys might have missed and what you can find on the channel with him in the other videos, and tell us why we keep teasing people with this fake Rand article and the Lex Friedman Fiona Hill, and yet keep talking about historical geopolitics. Take it away,
Yeah,
George.
I'm George McMillan. I've been a security contractor in Iraq and Afghanistan for the past 12 years, off and on. And yeah, we're just challenging the narrative that Putin attacked Russia for absolutely no reason, which is a bunch of bunk. There's a bunch of news channels out there on YouTube, so we thought we would add a geostrategic channel to this. There's even a lot of channels that cover the different pipeline infrastructure that cover that exclusively. But what we're trying to cover is the infrastructure documentaries placed in context of Mackinder's geostrategic theory, and also place it in the context of Clausewitzian Pomesi and Dime analysis, which is political, military, economic, social, infrastructural, and informational integration, or simpler form is diplomatic, infrastructural, military, economic integration. And what we're getting at is there's the Wolfowitz papers in 1992 were very concerned with the United States spreading democracies throughout the world. Now, that was in 1992, and the particular concern is that Russia sells cheap gas and integrates a whole bunch of really corrupt countries against the Western liberal democracies. Now, a lot's changed since then because the internal dynamics of the United States has changed. Also, Soviet communism is gone, and there's a lot of internal change in Eurasia between Russia and, well, Russia and China, Russia with Central Europe, Russia with Western Europe. As soon as Marxist communism ended, especially under Putin, they got rid of the atheism and went back to trying to restore religion and the nuclear family. So the Russians started building Orthodox churches, and people from the Arab Peninsula started spending, billions of dollars on building radical mosques in Eurasia. Meanwhile, the United States has shifted from a conservative Christian country much more towards an agnostic and secular. So there's been a shift, especially in the university system. But what we're getting, so there's a lot of internal and external dynamic shifts that are occurring globally. But we want to get into the geostrategic angle first, and then get into the other, Western versus Eastern internal dynamics, several videos down the road. So in this, what we previously did an overview of the six power center theory, and today we want to go into a little bit more in depth because Yes, Serbia and you over here and I are just getting used to working with each other again. So I built up I added a lot more maps to the PowerPoint slides. So we're going to go over the six power center theory in a little bit more depth and a little bit more systematically, because I think the more people look into this and start to understand the actual books and frameworks that are into this, then they're going to realize the whole situation in Europe is a lot more planned out than, yeah. And then, well, the more you realize that everything is a lot more planned out, the more the Putin is crazy, Putin attacked Ukraine for no reason, the more that falls apart. So, yeah, so here we're at section 2. The six power center doctrine to isolate Russia from being the central energy supplier of Europe and Asia. And then we can just read through the slide sets, because again, yesterday we went through how this is a Russian-centric explanation. The original five power center doctrine was Amerocentric, with with the U.S. being in the central position at number 1 and trying to connect to Western Europe and Power Center 2. And then in that one, Japan and the Pacific Rim became Power Center number 3. Then, of course, Russia was in Power Center number 4 in that one. And the goal of George Kennan's long telegram was to separate Russia in Power Center 4 from China in Power Center 5. Now, in this map, I've renumbered it and made it a Russo-centric explanation in terms of Mackinder, where Russia becomes Power Center number 1, Germany and Western Europe is Power Center number 2. India is a newly industrialized country. Well, they're past a newly industrialized country to an industrialized country. So now I've added that as Power Center 3, and that's how I bump up the original Power Center 5 power centers to 6. In this one, China's 5, and China is 4, Power Center 4. Japan is Power Center 5, and the United States would be Power Center number 6. Mackinder's original theory in 1902 and later on in some of his later books, was it Democracy and Idealism? I have it listed later. He has a heartland versus rimland and sea power versus land power dual dichotomy strategy, where he's talking about Russia may have the most immense amount of resources, but the coastal powers and the naval powers have a lot easier way of shipping goods and communicating with the other sea powers, because at that time they didn't have cars and automobiles and trains and planes and all that. It was just the turn of the century, so that stuff was just emerging. Well, let's see, that would have been 1902, so there would have been a transcontinental railroad, but the whole railroad network as a whole wasn't built up yet. But he was thinking that if they ever, his later thought was about the more the Soviet Union developed internal logistical supply routes, the more it could integrate with the other powers. Let's see. So in this case, we went over under the present situation, if Russia integrates with Germany, they're integrating the biggest petroleum exporting country to one of the biggest industrial powers in the world. And if that integration occurred, well, then it shifts the global center of gravity from Washington and London to Berlin and Moscow. So let's shift to the next slide here. We also went through, okay, so yesterday we went over the Russia to India through Iran international north-south trade corridor. I didn't have any maps up yesterday, but we have a map up today. And in this case, you can see how you have the traditional, or you have the old railroad system that the Soviet Union had, and you have the old British railway system in Iran. And what's integral here is the Bandar Abbas port, just north of the Strait of Hormuz, is a shallow water port, and ships have to unload in Dubai onto the big deep draft ocean going ships have to unload in Dubai onto the shallow smaller ships to ship stuff to Bandar Abbas, where it can then get on the railway system. India has wanted to build Charbahar port in Balochistan, Sistan Balochistan, Iran, just outside the Strait of Hormuz, because that's a natural harbor and it's a deep water port in the Arabian Sea. It's just on the other side of Pakistan, so they can get around Pakistan because that's their rival, and they can unload. Now that project has been talked about for decades, and Modi did not pursue it under Trump. The different big, huge port construction companies are still mainly Western, and they were afraid to get caught up in U.S. sanctions. President Trump did have an exception and a waiver, but the company still didn't want to get involved in case there's a change in president. They didn't want to get sanctioned and lose all their other government contracts. So, but recently, after the withdrawal of Afghanistan, Modi is so furious at the United States for not only arming the Sunni Wahhabist VEOs during the 1980s when it was the Mujahideen. Now they just changed the name of it to the Taliban. They're so furious that the United States trained and equipped these people to the tune of $80 billion worth of military equipment, and then left, and the Afghan army disintegrated along ethnic and religious lines. Now there's a whole bunch of numerous groups in Afghanistan whose goal it is to obliterate different borders in Central Asia. Like the Uzbekistan Islamic movement is supposed to destabilize and get rid of the border between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. You have a Sunni Tajik Taliban whose role it is to obliterate the border between Afghanistan and Tajikistan. A lot of them operate they all operate out of Faizabad. They operate out of different areas in Pakistan. And their goal is ultimately to obliterate their borders to reestablish the Khorasan. So ISIS-K is the international fighters who are there to coordinate, fund, and logistically supply all the other Sunni violent extremist organizations in that area. So when the United States left Afghanistan, they really left a big, huge mess. And that's why I started talking about the United States went from a regime change nation building strategy back to a Brzezinski style destabilization program. So
okay, George,
the goal for the United States.
So far we almost got to Power Center 3, which is India, if I'm not mistaken. if
I'm
I'm
just
wrong.
gonna.
For the ones who are
Yeah, I'm just
counting.
gonna. Oh, okay. Yeah, we're still at. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna focus here because there's so much going on in this area, and I haven't covered it in hardly any of the other interviews I've done with
Hmm.
anybody. So it doesn't matter what order you explain this stuff in. You can only explain one thing at a time. So
Yeah.
while we have the map up and we're talking about the integration of the different railway and pipeline projects,
These are the
you know,
same
you can also
railways.
talk about,
These are the
you
same
can also talk
railways
about.
that you mentioned the other day that the Chinese were upgrading, correct?
Yeah, the Chinese have upgraded the old Soviet system. And of course, the risk to mission of that now is these terrorist organizations destabilize the place and blow up the railroads and blow up the pipelines. So that's why a lot of people are saying, well, question whether the United States pulled out of Afghanistan and left it a mess on purpose. But getting back to Charbahar port, the Chinese ended up building 2 ports at Charbahar, and then the Indians finally came back and built 2 more ports in Charbahar so they can use it also. But they still lack a railroad connection that ties Charbahar port to Zahedan and then connects that to the old British railway system to then connect to the Russian and the old Soviet railway system. But hold on, let me click this off. The railway from Zahedan down to Kash, the first couple hundred kilometers of it is done. So now to make Chabahar Port fully functional and connected to the railroad, only about 500 kilometers of railway is needed, and that's an easy railway system. So that would connect Russia, one of the biggest oil producers in the world, with an industrialized India with 1.4 billion people. So it's got a big, huge market of scale. Russia could trade for them, can trade oil and natural gas to India, and then structure a lot of joint ventures so they can increase an ISI program and an import substitution investment program. That way they can build up their own industries inside Russia, because with all the Western companies leaving, they're going to have to build up their own industry. Like Jeffrey Sachs was talking about, a lot of the oligarchs during the Clinton administration that the Clinton administration helped put in power when Yeltsin was president of Russia ended up looting the place and exporting the capital outside of Russia. They became very Western oriented, and they've been donating money to all these DC think tanks. And the goal was to never let Russia rise again, which means not to ever let them internally develop. And if their investment capital keeps on getting exported outside of Russia, then they don't internally develop quickly enough. So Putin came back into power and has been trying to establish capital controls. And people that don't comply, well, they've been falling out of windows and falling out of rooftops if they, if they don't invest enough inside Russia. So that's what's going on there. And Jeffrey Sachs had wanted more economic power broken up and more competition in Russia so they would economically develop faster and more capital would stay inside Russia. But the Clinton administration and the Bush administration also with Rumsfeld and Cheney, they want power concentrated so Russia doesn't develop. Then they only have to deal with a dozen oligarchs, and it's easier to control a dozen people than thousands of people in a perfect competition model. So that's Jeffrey Sachs's major critique of Western foreign policy of Russia from the 90s into the 2000s. He's only been really talking about that lately, because now that we're on the start of World War III, it's become a real hot issue of how we got here. So again, just to close this out, to integrate India and China, Moscow to India, they're only 500 kilometers of railway project away from that. So let's go down to Russia and China. There's a lot more to this map than is readily apparent. China's been trying to build up its internal logistical supply routes to avoid U.S. naval interdiction. Okay, so I post this map up because Mackinder's was changing his theory as during the 30s and 40s when he was in the United States. The more railroads and things like that that were built that would connect Russia in the heartland to the sea power coastal regions of Eurasia. So China, in this map, China's been integrating with Russia to get their fuel and to trade supplies back. Plus, like you were just in Russia and talking about the Chinese car companies that have moved to Russia and with joint ventures and started building vehicles up there. So that increases Russia's internal economy. So in this case, China has focused on building pipelines to Iran and Turkmenistan because Turkmenistan is a landlocked country and can't export its immense natural gas supplies from the Caspian area to any other country except for basically China. There's no sense for them exporting natural gas to its neighbors of Iran and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan or Kazakhstan, because they have oil and natural gas too. They don't need it anymore. They're all selling the same product. So China has infrastructurally integrated with Iran so they could skirt Western sanctions. And then they've integrated with Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, because they also have immense oil and natural gas and a whole bunch of other minerals and resources. They built a railroad spur down to Mazar-e Sharif in Afghanistan to export minerals. So they're connected. And then what they've also done over the past, I think it was about 10 years ago, it was a while ago, they bought that big inland port in Duisburg, Germany. And so they can ship up and down the Rhine or even take stuff out to sea on container ships, or shift everything around on railway systems. So I was watching the video where they're sending about 30 train loads of goods back and forth between Germany and China. So China has got the infrastructural, economic, and diplomatic ties with Russia, Central Asia, all the way through to Germany through these trade routes, because the more trains and stuff you're sending back and forth, the more the different companies are interacting, but also the more your embassies are interacting with the other countries' embassies. So whenever
it becomes cheaper because of economies of scale, right? It becomes cheaper for everybody, basically, and it's mutually beneficial, like you were saying.
Right. Yeah, that's why I mentioned you got 1.4 billion people in India and 1.4 billion people in China. Way back in the first Felix Rex video I talked about, with that big of a market of 2.8 billion plus everybody else, so now you're over, you're you're into the billions, you can produce enough goods to drop the unit cost of, of whatever, whether it's cars or iPhones or whatever. And you don't really need Western markets anymore to drop your unit cost. You can produce economies of scale because you have the corresponding markets of scale. So you can balance your supply and demand distributions.
Gotcha.
So then and Power of Siberia pipeline is not in this map, but that's in the Far East. So you have railway, highway, and pipeline infrastructure connecting between China and Russia, China and Central Asia, and then actual railway all the way to anywhere in Europe you want to go. You can go back and forth very easily now. So it's a regular routine with, the significance of sending 30 trains is that it's a very routine deal now. So there's no more diplomatic.
When you say 30 trains, you mean 30 trains a day or a week or a month?
A week.
A week, right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. All right. So now let's get down to, if we get down to the Russo-Japanese link. Yeah, we didn't have the maps up yesterday when we did the overview, but I added them today so we could focus a little bit more on each area as we go along. Sakhalin has 3 major oil and gas exploration sites, one in the north, one in the middle, one in the south. Sakhalin 1, 2, and 3. The Japanese companies have bought out ExxonMobil, Royal Dutch Shell, and BP. I think those are the 3. They bought them out so they can continue the project, and have basically kind of just ignored Western sanctions on Russia.
Just to clue people in, this is also Russia over here next to China, because some people are not good with geography. And this is also part of Russia, this island called Sakhalin Island. And this is Japan. And Russia stretches quite a bit. For the people who need a reminder, I'll just let you continue now.
Yeah, well, in other videos I'll get even more maps up so people can actually visualize and see where the different oil fields are in Russia, because they have big oil and gas fields from one end of Russia to the other. So in this one, the significance of this is if one looks at the proximity of the islands, you have Sakhalin Island, which is Russia, which was ceded during the Russo-Japanese War of I think that was 1906. I'm sure if I'm off on the air, somebody in the comment section will look it up, right? Anyway, they always do.
I look forward to that.
Yeah. Yeah, gives them something to do. Double check my memory from dates. Anyway, all they really need here, because it's just 100 kilometers or something between Sakhalin Island and Hokkaido Island, is to build a big pipeline tunnel that goes underneath the sea, and then they can build, railway and pipelines, and they already have railway and pipeline infrastructure between Hokkaido and Nippon Island, the main island. Then if you can build that, then 100%, then Japan, which relies on 90 some odd percent of its oil and gas coming from the Middle East, all of a sudden they can get 100% of whatever they need, either from Sakhalin or from Vladivostok. Okay, the big deal with Sakhalin would be the gas pipes, because shifting everything, to LNG, from a gaseous state to liquid state back to a gaseous state for natural gas is extremely time consuming and costly. If you can just pipe the gas directly and not have to change its form, the cost of delivering the gas just plummets. It becomes so much cheaper. So once that pipeline and tunnel system is built, Japan's already got a pipeline and tunnel system in it. So then they wouldn't need to rely on the Middle East at all. So if Russia and the United States ever went to war and none of the insurance companies, none of the Western insurance companies would insure the ocean-going ships going through the Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Malacca, and South China Sea, then Japan wouldn't be at risk for having a total economic collapse in case there's any logistical supply problems due to war. So that's extremely advantageous for Japan, but to the United States, if they build that last tunnel, then Russia has infrastructurally and economically and diplomatically integrated with Japan. So that pulls Japan out of the American power center orbit and puts it into the Russian power center orbit. And that's what the concern is. So the conclusion of this slide set is going to be, getting the bottom line up front here, would be the integration of Russia, of integrating 5 of the world's 6 power centers, comes down to the 500-kilometer railway from Kash, Iran to Chabahar Port, and that one tunnel going from Sakhalin to Hokkaido. And it is a 300-meter under the sea tunnel. Yeah, there you go. But they built deeper undersea tunnels in Norway, so it's doable. So now let's go down to I just throw an aside because I want to say I watched half a dozen of Zian videos because he's really big into this, and he really downplays the ability for Russia and China to survive on their own. I'm skeptical. I think they're much farther along than Western people want to admit. So, again, just here throwing out just a counter argument that people may want to look at this and rethink things a little bit.
Yeah, there's very few people discussing this level of, how should I say, academic approach to the whole thing. And as you say, the ones who are a little blindsided by their biases. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I pulled off one project to go back to doing this because I knew about it, but doing the slide sets and how to represent this is a little bit problematic. So I went back to John Lewis Gaddis's book, Strategy is Containment, and that's why I used his 5 power center doctrine to explain this.
It's a very good presentation, I have to say. Here we keep going with the pipelines.
Yeah. So let's do. Okay, here I already started mentioning some of the different foreign Sunni Wahhabi violent extremist organizations operating in this area. Under George Kennan, the ambassador to Moscow in the late 40s, right after World War II, he wrote in his long telegram that the Soviet Union should be surrounded and to keep Russia and China together. So in this theory, whether it be an evolution of Mackinder's theory or Nicholas Spikeman called the area around the oceans the buffer zone area, and it's an area where there's the most war. So you're talking about the Middle East and Central Asia and the Black Sea areas, very contested areas. So if you destabilize Central Asia, then it disrupts the oil and gas pipeline projects, especially if there's an intelligence agency that pays these different violent extremist organizations just to go blow up railroad lines and blow up pipelines. Because the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, the original Conoco pipeline, never got, it never got built because Afghanistan's been so destabilized. And it was Operation Cyclone that Zbigniew Brzezinski started in the late 70s with Admiral Stansfield Turner when he he went from admiral to director of Central Intelligence of the CIA. So they developed the Operation Cyclone to be disruptive in this area during the late 1970s. The Reagan administration continued that by funding and supporting the Mujahideen. If anybody's seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War, that's what they're talking about is destabilizing the infrastructure in Central Asia. So this isn't new. Like I said at the outset, we're challenging the narrative that Putin attacked Ukraine for no reason, because the more you know about the five power center doctrine from the past and how I changed it to the six power center doctrine because I included India, then the reasons why Putin attacked Ukraine become very clear, and why Putin was objecting to the eastward expansion of NATO becomes more clear. And going back from the transition of power from Yeltsin to Putin, why Putin was put in power in the first place by the oligarchs that were pro-Russian. Because the oligarchs that were pro-Russian, that want to invest and develop Russia, are mad at the Western-oriented oligarchs that are exporting the capital. So some oligarchs are getting thrown out of windows and having mysterious debts. Those are the Western-oriented oligarchs. And the ones that want to put all their money back into Russia and make it another Russian empire or even a superpower, or definitely want to make Russia a regional power at the very least, they're the ones that are backing Putin. So when you see the articles of Washington Post of, the oligarchs are going to assassinate Putin at any minute now, and Putin's got no allies, and just, the New York Times and Washington Post put articles like this out, just like every other week since this war started, and it's not true.
When you bring up those narratives of the various people who say Putin is crazy and whatnot, I remember the Fiona Hill interview, which this whole thing is basically motivated by. Do you want to take a little break and cut away to that and have? Well,
let's just go ahead and close. Let's just go ahead and close this section out and let's get to that in the next video.
All right.
Can we do that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I just want people to know that how important this is. All right, so moving down to go down to the dime. That one. Yeah, the importance of this slide set is I not only want to introduce, the thought lineage between Mackinder, Spikeman, to George Kennan, John Lewis Gaddis, Brzezinski, and the Wolfowitz and the Rand documents. We're going to have to do a segment on each one of these things so people can understand. It also is working in conjunction with political and economic development theories. So again, why am I one of the only people or few people that is talking about this? Well, I mentioned briefly a little bit about my unified behavioral theory, my lateral integration of disciplines. since I'm working on that, since I've been working on that for decades, because it answers a number of longstanding questions in the philosophical and social sciences. It made me familiar with a wide variety of works from different fields. So that's why I came back after Nord Stream blew up and wanted to get back into this, because people need to understand the literature, in writings, physically see what the books are, and we're going to get to it. And they need to see what area of strategic studies, how this stuff links, because in this case, we're focusing on the increase of infrastructural integration. Okay, this one has infrastructure and information. With information, you're talking about communications and transportation. So it has the increased infrastructure and communications with other countries. It increases your economic integration, your societal integration, and then your political and your military. So I just wanted people to know, because in a democracy, decisions are supposed to be made by informed consent. And unless you're informed about this area of thought, that, plenty of people do this in the Pentagon, but the public doesn't know about it. So if they're not informed, then how are they consenting to our foreign policy is my problem here. Because the whole Putin is crazy thing is just, it's a bunch of bunk. All right. Okay. So here we go with the China Belt and Road Initiative. You had the original Silk Road Initiative of upgrading building pipelines to the Caspian Sea, so they wouldn't have to get all of their oil and natural gas out of the Middle East and out of Malaysia and Indonesia, where it could be intercepted by U.S. Navy and the British Navy. They wanted to start internalizing as much infrastructure as they could, and so the best way to send gas is just one continuous pipeline, because it's a lot faster and just a hell of a lot cheaper. But again, in a military situation, having that internalized is a huge advantage, keeping it away from the U.S. Navy. So, go ahead and shift down to the next one. Okay, yeah, I already briefly discussed this before. It's not just Russia that's integrating, but China's integrated with Germany and Russia, and is building a lot of infrastructure to Southeast Asia. They're trying to build a big high-speed rail network from Kunming down to Vientiane. They've already done that. They're trying to build a high-speed railway network through from Bhutan, Thailand, down to Bangkok, and then down to Penang, Malaysia.
I think I saw some statistic that the Chinese have built more railroad than has been built in history ever up to this point. Only in China they've built more than the whole world has built it in history. Some statistic like that I think I saw at some point. I think it's old, but obviously.
Yeah, I mean, because of the vast area that you're talking about, that's believable, because they have a really dense railway network. Again, maybe put more maps up, but they have an extremely dense railway network in the eastern half of China, where all the people live, because you're talking about,
not only that,
1.4.
They've also built out, I think half of Africa's railroad has been upgraded or redone or laid by the Chinese recently.
Okay. Oh yeah, if you include that, then you're right. Yeah. So what they've been, they've been building, a huge, very sophisticated network in the eastern half of China, where, a billion out of the 1.4 billion people live. Then in the past 15 years, it's trying to build more railroads and more high-speed railroads from Beijing out to Urumqi, out towards the Gobi Desert, and they're trying to build trying to complete a road. Well, they already have a road through the CARICOM going through Pakistan over the mountains. I think they're trying to build a railroad there too, ultimately. But the Sunni Pashtun Taliban keep on blowing up their engineers as they try to complete more of that project going over the Himalayan mountains, the CARICOM mountains. Yeah, if we could go ahead and drop down a little bit. All right, so that's again, with Russia from integrating with to have a 5-power Eurasian bloc, it's down to the Kash to Chabahar Railway and the Sakhalin to Hokkaido pipeline. It's the only thing that they have left to integrate. I think we're almost done here. Okay, now we're going to get to some of the academic books. Now we're going to get to some of the academic books. I worked in Operations Center so long, I'm still monitoring my chat boxes. It's a habit I can't lose. He you get to hear of deindustrializing the U.S. during the 1980s. Clyde Prestowitz was he was an undersecretary of trade under the Clinton administration. He typically votes Republican, but that was back in the Clinton administration. They were trying to do they were trying to be bipartisan. We kind of welcome those days back in some ways, right? Now we're so divided. But he had written a book called Trading Places. I think it was, 88 or something like that, 87 or whatever, about how the United States was offshoring its jobs and deindustrializing. Before I talked about the two primary trends of technology and population growth over time, and the two secondary trends of first world country jobs moving to the global south, and with the huge populations, they're moving back up north. So that's a global equilibrium rate. So during the 70s, during the 70s and 80s, and left-leaning literature, they really wanted to give the unions more power in North America and in Europe, and increase, collective bargaining agreements like that. People like Lindblom and Dahl from Yale were arguing that, and that was their big piece to add to the socialist transformation of America step by step. But what the car companies did, and not just the car companies, it was the tire manufacturers and people like that. When their factories got old during the 70s and 80s and in the 90s, when they wanted to replace them, they just started building mega factories either in Mexico or Brazil, or in the case of tire companies, they started building these mega factories all over Malaysia, Indonesia, and in Thailand. So when I take my motorcycle trips around Southeast Asia, I drive by and I look at all these factories just to get an eyes-on view of it, because you learn so much by seeing how they develop in these. They can replicate these things and build out the infrastructure in a very planned system that's very efficient. But what the Southern Hemisphere gained in jobs in manufacturing, of course, the United States hollowed out. And Robert Reich wrote that we should have an industrial program also in new deals. That was also, 86, 87 era. I forget when that came out. So I find it kind of amusing that Trump adopted the reindustrialized United States platform that these two people advocated. And of course, and as Michael Moore, the film director, had been arguing about during the 1980s and 90s, well, Trump comes along and actually does it, and they hate him. Just to tell the audience how these thinkers that are in have really flip-flopped and become hypocritical. All right.
Gotcha.
So moving to the next slide. Yeah, John Lewis Gaddis he worked for the U.S. Naval War College in Annapolis. He was a professor, so he would do a lot of presentations with the War College. So when they talk about how Putin attacked for no reason and Putin's crazy, and no, the whole movement of NATO into Eastern Europe to strangle Russia's port systems and then start taxing the oil and gas transfers. Again, it's a bunch of nonsense. John Lewis Gaddis is the one that developed the five power center doctrine. He knew Kennan, interviewed Kennan a lot. They worked together a lot. Ultimately, after George Kennan died in the early 2000s, he wrote a biography of George Kennan. So they had, in that sense, they'd actually worked a lot together. So this is a key book in the strategy of containment of how Mackinder's theory and then Spikeman's theory is what motivated George Kennan to write his long telegram. Yeah, George Kennan in that slide set there. That's how it became the strategy of containment, and then became Brzezinski's grand chessboard, and then became the Wolfowitz doctrine and the Rand documents, where we're going to have to do several videos on that, because it really is important not only to understand this literature, but interface it with political and economic development theory. And of course, we're going to use the Pomesian dime strategic theory to do that. So yeah, if you move down to okay, so if you know that Russia only needed the two railway systems to complete their integration, the one easy one being the Zahedan to Chabar Port Railroad, because that just goes through desert and it's got to go over some mountains and some stuff like that, but it's not difficult. It's easy to build. India was just afraid of hiring Western companies to do it and then having sanctions. So nobody really wanted to participate, because then they would lose other government contracts. So, and then the major one was the Sakhalin to Hokkaido railroad system. So once you know that, the neocon crowd, for lack of a better term, started getting more nervous about this integration. So a lot of people theorize that's why they suddenly pulled out of Afghanistan, knowing it was going to be a mess. Because if it creates trouble in the areas where they're trying to integrate these last pipelines and railroads, then of course it serves to separate Russia and China. Brian Bertlick talks about the National Endowment of Democracy using the NGOs to destabilize regions. Jonathan, that helps me out with the Matt Bracken videos, he did an overlay of where the infrastructural projects are in Iran and where the allegations of police brutality, different forms of police brutality is what it is, just happened to appear. So the protesting just happens to appear where these in the same areas where these railroad, port, and pipeline
Uncanny.
infrastructures are.
Uncanny.
Yeah,
It's almost like
it's
based on your analysis, you can start predicting this stuff.
yeah, it's almost like why I got into this a decade ago. Yeah, wherever there's pipeline and ports going through, you need peaceful protesters to go out and blow stuff up.
Yep.
After you see it the first few dozen times, you can start to you've seen the movie before. So in this case, not only did we leave $80 billion worth of weapons, people have different numbers on it, and the train and equip costs and what's still there, what's used, what's blown up. There's different ways of calculating those numbers, but I'll just stick with the $80 billion, rough number. Yeah. So if you want to destabilize and keep China from developing these railway projects, you would destabilize that area. So SIGAR, the Special Inspector General for the Afghan reconstruction, says that I heard one report that said $1 billion was missing since the Taliban took over. Another one that said that $2 billion went missing. We'll have to double check that number. But anyway, some significant amount of money went missing. On our Telegram channel, once we were debating this on the Telegram channel, people immediately started posting the recent pictures of the Taliban offloading pallets of cash at Kabul airport. So then coincidentally, the protests in Iran and the trouble in Central Asia starts. Correlation's not cause, but one could draw an inference, I guess it would be safe to say.
Especially when it happens, on a regular basis everywhere.
Yeah. So up in the Badakhshan area of northern Afghanistan in Faizabad, that's the big operating base for ISIS-K. That's ISIS Khorasan. They're tasked with coordinating the smaller groups to obliterate the borders, to remake the Khorasan area. They want to re-Islamize the area because the Russians came in and especially the Soviet Union and tried to ban all religion. So they're not only rebuilding the mosque, but they're building Wahhabi mosques because the people in the Arab Peninsula are paying for it, not necessarily the House of Saud. There's more oil sheikhs that want to get rid of the House of Saud and go to a caliph. If the House of Saud were to fall, because it is a Wahhabi, Salafi Wahhabi country, well then, and if a caliph became the head of Saudi Arabia, that would be ISIS or Al Qaeda controlling Saudi's oil fields. So then, under Promethean dime analogy, they would have immense amount of money to buy whatever weapons to export their jihad. It would be a huge increase to terrorism. Let me put it that way. So ISIS-K coordinates and supplies the logistical supply routes for Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, the East Turkestan Islamic movement, which is the Uyghurs, along with the Sunni Tajik Taliban, who are obviously Tajik. So they want to obliterate the Afghan Tajik boundaries, the Afghan Uzbek boundaries, and even the boundary in Fergana Valley between Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, where those countries meet. So let's go down to the Shanghai Cooperation Council. If you're going to leave the petrodollar, you need a replacement currency to handle the trade. Right now, Russia's making more deals to trade in rubles and rupees, rubies and dirham, and dinar, the different currencies of that area, and of course, trading rubles for Chinese RMB. So again, they're two infrastructural projects away from integrating Eurasia, and that would be an integration block of 5 out of the 6 world industrial powers, the 6th being the United States, who's already been deindustrialized during the 1980s and 90s when the big mergers and acquisitions companies started buying U.S. companies and then breaking them apart and moving to different segments overseas. When they broke up AT&T and they moved Western Electric, Western Electric ended up going out of business and shipping its jobs to Southeast Asia or East Asia. That just moved. It just moved tens of thousands of jobs in electronics outside of the United States. Same thing with RCA and Philips and these different electronics manufacturers, whether they're in Europe or the United States, just started shipping their manufacturing overseas. And once you lose an industry and your workforce finds other jobs, trying to reinvent an industry in your country, reestablish it, it ends up taking years because you have to train people. If you put them on an assembly line, it's going to take them a while before they start to get to work together because, if you start to move people at different areas of the assembly line every week so you can start cross-training people, that can be a tremendously long problem to solve. Okay, I want to close out here as far as the theoretical part of this. You have an antagonism between economic and political development theory and geostrategic theory. So I want to represent this in terms of the Kantian peace triangle because when I was in and out, finishing my BA and eventually going back and finishing my MA and all of that, trying to shuffle between work and school. But anyway, everybody was so excited that the Berlin Wall fell and Marxist communism was going away and we could have this happy, shiny people. I mentioned it in the Felix Rex videos. If you integrated everybody economically, it increases interdependence. If you increase diplomatic compromise, then you're moving towards peace. So the Kantian peace triangle, he did this in Perpetual Peace. I think that was 1768, I think he wrote that or something, maybe 1786, whatever. He thought that you needed democratic institutions in different countries because democracies will be less tend to fight. And based on shared values from economic interdependence, once people start doing business together, they won't want to go to war together because they're going to lose money if they do. And then different international or multilateral institutions to facilitate the trade. And in Europe, it was the European Coal and Steel Union. Now Russia's trying to start the Eurasian Economic Union to integrate Eurasia. We already talked about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So you get different regional international organizations. So you're not just talking about the UN, you're talking about the smaller regional ones is really actually more important here because you're trying to increase regional cooperation and decrease conflict. If you can move raw materials to where the factories are and finished goods back and forth, then people's living standards go up. So a lot of people, my professors really thought that the Kantian peace triangle of economic and political development would occur. And had that happened, you would have a much stronger integration between North America, Western Europe, and Russia, who's trying to restore morality by building more Orthodox churches. But the left in the United States has been trying to block that because they don't want a northern hemisphere against a southern hemisphere. Because if they plan to integrate the world globally, they don't want a bipolar world of the global north against the global south. So that's what has broken that up, and that's what's changed the internal dynamic in North America and in Europe against the kind of integration that, I just turned 60 recently. So we were expecting if the Soviet Union fell, we would get a Kantian peace plan. That's not, obviously with the war and the eastern expansion of NATO into Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, obviously that's not what was pursued. What was pursued was the geostrategic theory of Brzezinski instead. And I think we can bring this to a close on this one. Again, different people have challenged, well, Russia attacked Ukraine for no reason. And that's just, it's bunk. I like to cover this map in all the videos because not everybody gets to see it. But in Ukraine, you have the pipelines that go through, but their port at Rostov-on-Don, that's how Russia exports its immense agricultural products, fertilizer, and minerals. They ship it by train to, Moscow or Volgograd or from Ekaterinburg or whatever. They can load it on ships in Volgograd and then send it out the Don River to the, once it hits the seas, it can go anywhere in the world. So if you take Crimea away from Russia and block in Rostov-on-Don port, you can stop, like 70% of their ocean-going trade. Otherwise, they'd have to send stuff all the way to Vladivostok, which is still hemmed in by the U.S. Navy at the Japanese island chain. So this critical, the whole purpose of the Euro-Maidan revolution in 2014 was so they could charge huge transfer fees of the pipelines and force all the transactions into petrodollars, because if you put Hunter Biden on the board of Burisma and Devin Archer on the board of Burisma, they're going to make sure that the transfer fees are a high enough tax on Russian oil and natural gas that they can't compete with Western oil at much higher price. Plus, they're taking that money and using it to finance our $31 trillion in debt. And then, yes, most importantly, they're making sure that the Russians trade in dollars, not rupees, because that underpins our $31 trillion in debt. Let's go down a couple of slides. The eastward expansion of NATO is to move into all these countries where they can charge fees on the pipelines. So then Germany and Russia build Nord Stream to get around it, so they can't interfere with elections in Eastern Europe, or you can't necessarily move NATO in the sea the way you can do it on land. They tried to build a South Stream in the Black Sea from the Novorossiysk area to Varna, Bulgaria. That pipeline was never built. It was blocked. The United States in the early 2000s, they tried to build that pipeline in 2011 to 2014. The United States started shifting more and more resources to back political candidates in Bulgaria to stop the South Stream from going through. At the same time, they wanted Nord Stream stopped until it was stopped for sure on September 26th of this year. But it's to make sure that all of Russia's pipelines is traded in petrodollars. Steve Bannon said 2 weeks ago, I forget who was interviewing, but they said if the petrodollar collapsed, we would be a Venezuela overnight. Well, the concern with Nord Stream is, if you go down to the next slide set, Germany has been a big oil and gas pipeline hub for years. They have built, they can get oil and gas from anywhere and ship it on their pipelines to anywhere else. So with Nord Stream, they had the ability to feed all of Western and Eastern Europe with oil and natural gas. So even if NATO shut off the gas in Poland, Ukraine, and Georgia, they could still ship all the oil and natural gas that the Slavic countries could use and feed the German world. So in the German world, what I mean is Germany, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Austria. Slavic world is going to be Czech, Slovakia. You have the Magyars in Hungary. Okay, that's the exception. But then the rest of the countries, you have Slovenia, Croatia, and Serbia, where you are. And then Bulgaria, also more of a Tatar nation than Slavic, but they speak Russian, so we're going to count that here. So
it's similar. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. They all have Slavonic roots, let's say, old Slavonic roots. There's a lot of overlap, but it's not actually the same language.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm just trying to explain things to people that haven't been to your part of the world before.
Yeah.
Because most of the public in the United States will have no idea of what they will have never heard this information I put. That's why I wanted to put this on a slide set from yesterday. Matt didn't want to go through boring slide sets for his audience, but since we have a very small boutique audience and we want to cater to more of the graduate student audience here. Yeah. We went ahead and we're just going to go ahead and go through the slide sets because it takes longer. It's boring, but if people get the visuals and get to see what the literature is, I think people that are interested in this topic will want to see the citations exactly and want to know the chronology of it.
Yeah, and so if you want to understand it properly, you have to understand the whole picture, including the historical and economic and military and and basically. But you do a very good job of collating everything into one succinct package. And after this hour and 15 minutes basically of this video, I think we should call it a day for now and give people a breather. We'll call this lesson number 1 because everything up to this was an intro basically. And then next time we talk, we can get into some more current developments along this time path.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, so we'll get into...
Let me just, before we sign off, let me remind all the subscribers to edit and correct George's dates in the comments if you got any of the dates wrong. And if you did like this video, there is a button specifically for that. All right, now George, if you have something to say before we sign off.
Yeah, let's do that video I did with Constantine and Goran. I got a lot of complaints because the audio came out bad because I don't think they were hardwired in. But if we could go over, we did the Fiona Hill thing with Felix Rex, but if we could go over that for your audience because they didn't hear that. And I want to add that Australian military intelligence guy who they just, I mean, I just use them as examples because they're videos I came across on YouTube where these people that are in these high up intelligence positions that are briefing their presidents or prime ministers, whoever, whatever the situation is,
Mm-hmm.
completely unknowledgeable of what I put in these slide sets. And it really makes you wonder how they got that job.
When you say that, let's play that little clip at the end and leave that as a sign off, as a teaser for what's coming in the next episode. All right, let's find that.
We've got to have strategic empathy about Putin as well. We've got to understand how the guy thinks and why he thinks like he does. He has got his own context and his own frame and his own rationale. And he is rational. He is a rational actor in his own context. We've got to understand that. We've got to understand that he would take offense at something and he would take action over something. It doesn't mean to say that, we are necessarily to blame by taking actions, but we are to blame when we don't understand the consequences of things that we do and act accordingly, or take preventative action, or recognize that something might happen as a result of something.
What is the probability that Russia attacks Ukraine with a tactical nuclear weapon?
Yeah, I think that's
What can be said? What can be said? We'll leave that as a teaser of what's coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody who paid attention, who joined us. Have a good day, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you soon.